Okay. Thank you for that. And I think on that point, we'll bring in Jade to then lead now the discussions on the questions you posed to the community, and then I think to also the participants. So Jade.
Cool, thanks Cozy, and thank you Timnit. As always, thank you so much for your thoughts and for your insights and for answering everyone's questions. And you've now asked a question of us as Masakhane.
Yeah, I mean that's just you know, we don't have to stick to that. I mean but that was the stuff on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to reiterate for everyone, and particularly I'm going to ask, I know there were a number of Masakhanans, we were discussing this yesterday and today, so apologies if I pick on y'all. I see I'm very quiet. So. But the question was, how do we make sure that we're building technology that benefits our communities rather than replicating what's being done in Silicon Valley? And so I want to put up your hand if you're a Masakhanan who has a thought on that, or anyone else. And I might just kick it off with a thought, or just want to share with some of the stuff that we're doing on one of the most recent projects we're working on, and hopefully it kind of open up the discussion to some of the participants. Is we're working on a project which has got this broad title of Decolonizing Science, which is a very ambitious title, but what's been really interesting in terms of like ensuring that the technology is benefiting the communities has been really just focusing on getting the right team in the room. It's meant that the time, data curation, which I think we put a couple of months, maybe I think it was 2 months to do, has now ended up taking 6 months. It's because we had archivists in there, we had science journalists, for the African science journalists specifically ones who write in their language, as well as the translators themselves. Typically, I think in the West, they like to scrape data, whereas we were like, no, they're building with the translators.
That's awesome, yeah.
And it's just been like, a really intensive process. We also had Sabella Mkhlambi, who's acting as kind of our ethicist, to kind of just query each time we do something. And it's been like really crazy. And some of the strategies we learned is like, cool, if we're translating African papers, which is the goal was to translate African papers into 6 African languages, like which papers, who should the authors of those papers be? And so looking at it from like every possible angle, including like, cool, so if it's South African papers, we need to take into account race, so that we're not propagating only having white voices from South Africa. And if we're taking into account Cameroon, we need to ensure that we're getting both Anglophone and Francophone communities. And it's just, I think, yeah, that's one of the ways we're doing, is just trying to invest so much time in thinking about these problems.
Yeah.
So that's one of the thoughts. And so, yeah, would like to kick off to anyone else. I know Tajuddin had some thoughts around this. Tajuddin, would you like to share any of your thoughts? Tajuddin's probably sleeping. It's super late. He's there.
Where is he? Where is he located?
He's in China.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What time is it?
He says he'll write it.
Oh, he'll write it.
Oh man. Oh, 10:24 p.m. It's not that bad.
It's all right. It's much better than usual.
Okay.
Colin also had some thoughts about how we can do this, as well as Yassine.
So the reason I wanted to ask this question is every time I understand this, right? When I'm giving talks in Ethiopia, for example, a lot of people are like, why are you talking about ethics? We don't even have the technology. We're like trying to build this basic thing. We don't, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, I'm talking about it because the way we build it can be different, rather than, looking at what has already been built and trying to replicate that. The way we build it can be different. So one example is, when we look at, I've been trying to, there is a tech historian named Mar Hicks. They wrote a book called Programmed Inequality. And recently they had an article about big tech comparing it to the big three, they call the auto industry in the US. And the auto industry in the US is so problematic for so many reasons. But one of the reasons for the sprawl, like this urban sprawl that exists in suburban US, is because of the corruption of the auto industry. They were stopping railroad, train production, public, transportation, colluding with all the, I don't know, politicians and stuff. So now you have this concept of a city with cars. That's just this big, streets, huge pollution, like all this traffic and stuff. I wonder, right, if that didn't happen, what would be the concept of a city? I feel like maybe it would have just been, like narrow roads only for walking, like with maybe only with bikes, maybe only, public transportation. Cars might be like outside, relegated to a different place. I don't know. But now, because we didn't get there, when you look at cities around the world, they all almost look the same, right? Like it's the same sort of design. It's the same sort of big roads, whatever. And even if that's not the case, that's what they aspire to be like. But maybe if we read like the history of why that happened in the US, right? And that these auto companies and how corrupt they were and whatever, then like people might have a different concept of what this, city design would be like. So that was just one example that came to my mind. And so I think about sort of technology too, right? What's like, can we make that kind of parallels with technology? Oh, I see a hand. Let's see.
Mr. from Tajudeen.
Oh yeah, hi. Okay, you can talk now.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
yes.
can. And you can switch on your video if you want. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for the talk. And I think you're part of the authors of the data sheet for dataset paper. And I think I'm coming from electrical engineering background, and most
same
of
as me.
So most of how design is done, you really have to specify what you intend to do with your product. And I think that is really missing from the data perspective in ML. So it's really important we define the scope of the data we have. So what this data can be used for and to what extent, I think that's very important. And then secondly, from like the point of Masakhane, we have people that are indigenous of these languages. So like from Nigeria, my language is Hausa. So we notice on one of the projects, Masakhane NER project, we got data set from local news paper, and then we asked linguists, Hausa linguists, and they said that the way the writing is done, it's not the actual standard writing, but because of this is what everybody is just used to, but it's supposed to be like there is a way to write it that will make the information from the more clearer.
Interesting.
Okay, so currently we decided to, and then that's like what all the big companies are using, that standard, not the gold standard. So in real sense, even the data that is being used all over, I think that is Google translation for Hausa, but it's not even the standard.
Yeah, I mean, like they had, I think they used the old Bibles for Amharic, and nobody talks like that, right? And then for Tigrinya, they don't have Tigrinya on Google Translate, but the problem is that the writing is the same. It's the same alphabet, so they detect it as Amharic. So if I write something like I saw something on Twitter one time where somebody posted an interview with me in Tigrinya, and Google Translate just went haywire. Like it's like, let's get rid of the greedy, like just like that, greedy forever. And I'm just like, what? And they detected the wrong language, but they don't do that for other Romance languages that all use the I don't know, the Latin alphabet, right? There's many of them on there, and they don't just randomly detect the wrong language because it's that. But they just don't care. So like they, to give you an anecdote, before I got fired, there was one of the things I was saying that they should focus on. I wrote that, there's really no focus on, very little focus on non-English based stuff at Google. And I said, especially if you're working on, bias mitigation, blah, 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 like think about all of the things that people write about, right? They're all in the English language, right? Oh, this, sentiment detection has bias, or toxicity detection has bias, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're not. And oh my God, I got so mad because this VP, it's the same VP who wanted me to retract my paper, FYI, but this was before that. Fernando Pereira, who is like an NLP person. He's the VP that has a lot of natural language processing stuff. He was like, we do a lot of NL, like international, or I don't know what he said. Oh, no, there's a lot of work on like international stuff. And so it was basically like, we don't need to do more kind of thing. I'm like, well, as someone from the African continent whose mother tongue is not even in one of your sets of, languages, I beg to differ. And so, yes, and it was a whole, I was not very happy with that, but that's their attitude, And so the thing is, I would love, do we want the other question I had is more around, that paper on the history of machine translation, and how it's mostly been used for oppression, really. And so one question I had is, some people talk about how sometimes you don't want people to know what you're saying, right? So sometimes maybe I don't want my whatever I'm saying to be translated, to be able to be in a translation system. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, I'm wondering if you guys have thought about some of these things, and like what that might look like. Do we want all of our languages to always be able to be translated? If not, then like, how do we, what kind of use case do we like, right? I think you guys work with Translators Without Borders for Masakhane, Jade. I think I saw like that they're one of your partners or something, or collaborators.
Yeah. Alp's actually here from Translators, I think. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, but that was kind of one of the things I was thinking about, right? On the one hand, you're mad because, these companies don't have even my mother tongue even in their, portfolio of whatever they work on. And then on the other hand, I'm like, oh, well, do I want them to, I mean, and when do I want them to? I don't know, so this was the kind of stuff I was thinking about.
Something I think Bonaventure's here, or Chris Imizu's here, so I might ask you if you're keen. Put your hand up if you're happy to talk, and then I'll able me to do it. But they started working on African language to African language translation, because what is the US going to do with that? I just think that's great.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Actually, in Ethiopia, like there's a lot of people working on like translation between the various Ethiopian languages, too. Yeah. But I think, it's interesting. It's good to think about that too, because even if it's an African to an African language translation, you still have states that are, oppressing specific groups or whatever, and so like, how do we think about, the use cases of Translate, or maybe like limiting them in some way, or, should it even be like this thing that you can just, I don't know, use whenever? I don't know. It wasn't something I had really thought about, but it was just something I'm thinking about right now.
Hearing you talk, I feel like the whole machine learning should have a separate field on ethics and fairness. And I think you've talked about it a lot. And you and I don't remember her name unfortunately, but you to what if you introduce the data sheets. Yeah, I worked with Bona on African to African language. Based on what you said with Google Translate and everything, I've been thinking about two things. The first is, based on the discussion with Jade and Tajuddin and others on the topic you raised on how to enforce principle guidelines. I personally think like some of these guidelines that really are really good to reduce and control the way data is being used. They're really good, but one thing I've been thinking about is how do you enforce them? Because like you could write all these guidelines and a company could just come and take the data or if you have like a form, like, are you gonna do this? They're like, yeah, we'll do it. And then they just do what they want. So how do you enforce that these guidelines? For example, I'm taking inspiration from in Europe here, they have the GDPR, the data protection, and it's a huge thing that they have introduced in the whole of Europe that is super enforceable, such that even external companies like Google and Apple, you have to respect the rules and follow their regulations. So like, how was the whole continent like this able to create this thing, back it up and keep it enforceable? I think something like that for Africa would be great, but I feel like, I don't know, my question to you is this something that only the researchers and the data providers can enforce, or is this something that might need to involve maybe the governments, and organizations to really see the need for this and work together to enforce these rules around using data?
Yeah, I think that definitely, I believe that there needs to be a government, there needs to be laws around data governance. I heard that Yassine is working on on a data governance related stuff, right? From Meg anyways, but there needs to be 100% in my view, laws around it. And I think GDPR is a good one. There's, for example, let me give you an example, because I don't think it's going to come from the researchers. That's my point of view. When I look at the computer vision community, and I think you would be interested in, you just can go to any of the core conferences, right? Just browse the tracks, biometric, blah, 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 action recognition, it's all like that. So, and there's just no way, I just can't stand this community, to be honest with you, but like, it's not gonna be from there. So, but people in that community had to take down their data sets because they got sued. So IBM had to take out the diversity in faces data set because it violated this law called the Illinois Biometrics Act, Privacy Act, in the US. So this guy found himself in the data set and sued. So they took it down. So I think that until there's some sort of standard that everybody takes it for granted, that's how probably it's going to go. And then it should be a law and there should be some standard. But then I think that probably things like data sheets, not exactly whatever data sheets, but I think things like data sheets will be in the law, right? Like I read some part of the EU proposed regulation that cited things like data sheets and model cards. I think these will be part of that ecosystem that in regulation. So I certainly don't think it's just the researchers, but I think the researchers can help push to have those kinds of laws and to have that kind of standard. I was looking for this paper that I'm going to paste here on data stewardship. I'll paste it when I find it. Hey, Kathleen.
You're muted.
Unmute. Hi, Timnit. Hi, it's great to see you and thank you for the wonderful talk. I've got some comments on your question, and I like that we're converging on the topic of data governance. So I'm currently working with a team building a data set for ASR for Kiswahili, and we're essentially crowdsourcing data on Common Voice, which is all very community driven. Which touches on the topic of incentives, which is something that you've touched on, because a lot of the communities we're speaking with ask us, what's in it for me? we're not paying them. And currently we're communicating to them that, hey, inclusion on digital platforms, stuff like digital assistants. But I find it, I think this approach has its shortcomings, because I don't know if digital assistance is what ASR is going to look like in Africa, right? We're still grappling with electricity, and I don't know if 5 years from now, everybody will have an Alexa in their house, right?
Yeah.
So along with thinking about incentives, we're thinking a lot more about how to put power into the community's hands, because we're also faced with questions of, oh, I mean, we see surveillance, I'm giving my voice. Does that mean you could potentially get access to like my M-Pesa wallet, because voice is now being used for access? But it also, I think, is making us think about the fact that if we start to consider community governance, then that can be an incentive for communities to contribute. And for languages in particular, they're very intricately connected with culture, and culture is owned by the people. I like to think of the example of African arts and cultural relics in museums in, you know, France and the rest of the world. And how we're now starting to argue for that stuff to come back, because we know it doesn't belong to the Western world, it belongs to us. And in the same way, we can, or we should, start thinking about languages that the communities who speak those languages own. And if we can elucidate ownership, it means that we can then say, hey, the Swahili people have every right to say they want voice recognition used in agricultural contexts and not in, I don't know, financial context or whatever. But then community governance, I think, is ownership and governance is something that could be interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because a lot of communities might not want to participate. So like some people talk about, in the social sciences especially, talk about this, the politics of refusal. Like there are a lot of people who've been harmed by systems that are data driven, that they haven't seen the benefits, right? They've seen a lot of harm to them, so they don't want to participate. And so the way they deal with it, the way they kind of, you know, reclaim whatever that has happened to them, is by not finding different ways to not be in the database, or to not you know, have your face being recognized, have like some type of makeup, or to have that. And so you know, so I often wonder, every time we're trying to have that level of advancement in our communities, or have that type of inclusion in our communities, what it comes with, and kind of the same questions you're grappling with, right? Like, you know, what is what we're doing right? Like, how are we doing? And I think the ownership part is really key, because then they have power, and so then they can decide what, you know, what can be done with the data versus not.
And it's very interesting that we find it very easy to dispossess collectives as opposed to individuals, because if you look at speech synthesis, if I was a voice actor and I give my voice, they'd have to pay me loads of money, because it's a system they're going to build that sounds exactly like me. But then when we come into speech recognition and you're now in need of thousands or millions of voices, it's very easy to say, hey, none of you owns the output. I now own it because I did. And we should be able to exist in a reality where, in the example of the Maori people, I think they should be encouraged to build that data set and have the option of just saying, no, nobody's going to use it until we are resourced enough to use it ourselves, and have studied enough how we want to use it. Yeah,
I'm gonna find that here's the Wired article on the Maori, and then you've seen it. Oh, good. Yeah, like I also saw their rejection, and I thought it was great that they had their like video of why they decided not to sell their data set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
And I think Yassine and Mohammed are next. Yassine, take it away.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, obviously I have less and less to say about data governance, but reacting to some of the points here, I think, so one of the ones about what you were just talking about is one of the most frustrating thing with working with fellow technologists is this approach of like, they don't want to give us their data because they don't know what's good for them. And like fighting back against that of like, no, actually, like you're the ones who should be convincing them that it's going to benefit them if you want them to participate, has been like trying to drive that narrative has been interesting. More generally, I think one thing to keep in mind and what we've been doing in Big Science is trying to play on all of those levers at once, because data governance has so many things. And it means that, so I think some of that, what we were talking about before, which is that some of what we can do is set norms, right? Set those standards. And we do not have to wait for laws. The other thing is like not thinking of laws as absolutes. Because when you're like, even at the European Union level and hearing from the back channels, they're like, yes, we have these data governance acts, but you hear like that someone told you that maybe actually they're not going to have data altruism only be for public interest, and someone is thinking about making it accessible for corporations. So yeah, I think it's really important for everyone to keep in mind that the things that we do are the things that impact how those laws are going to be written. And the
absolutely.
That we make available are going to decide what people do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, because I wrote my data sheets for data sets before the laws, and then they incorporated them in the laws. They said, oh, maybe this is something we need to have. Or when we wrote gender shades with Joy, it was just showing a problem, and then the laws came later. So we don't have to wait for the laws to say this is what we think needs to be done, right? Then we could actually shape these conversations. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And even once the laws come, we can do things that are more restrictive than the laws, right? Your point about the laws not being absolute, right? Like we don't have to just do the bare minimum. But that's the thing about incentives. We have to create an incentive structure for ourselves where that's kind of what makes us, that's what we abide by, right? It's too easy not, if you don't have the incentive, I think it's too easy to do something different.
Agreed. Incentives, it keeps me up at night. I sort of want to add a funny comment. Is at the time we presented at WMT, which is the World Machine Translation Conference, we struggled to publish the year before, and a year later they asked us to keynote. And so in our keynote, we got a whole bunch of very interesting questions. And one of them was like, how do you get communities from low resource backgrounds to give you give you their data? I'm like, no. You don't get someone, you don't trick someone into doing this. You know, if it's a community you're not part of, you go to them and say, hey, this is the tools we have. Can they be beneficial to you in any way? And how can we help? Like, do you see any alliances with what you have? And this is what, like, speak to them, you know, as human beings and not extractive ways. It was just very, very, very strange.
Oh my
so
gosh.
It was wild. And this is like the top, you know, machine translation people in the world, and this is their narrative. So
can we have our own machine translation conference, like that has a different incentive? I'm sure you're thinking about it eventually. Our own other conference, like the deep learning in Dava, can expand to be like we all go there and that's our conference, you know, and anybody who wants to publish something on anything Africa has to go through that. So then that's the gate, you know, that's you're the gatekeepers, right? Not them.
Yeah, Fakosi, what do you think about that?
I'm sure you have plenty of time to work on. I'm sure you're looking for more things to do. So this is just my contribution here.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit on that, and I think Mohammed also wants to come in and pull the thing. Yeah, so one of the things that as the Indaba has been growing, and then one of obviously a great, a real good spin-off has been Masakhane, and then being able to see that grow. And there's many things in this community that we know we don't see, and we are really always open from the Indaba perspective, from seeing what people are doing, and also making sure we prop up, or not even prop up, but work with DSA, with Black and AI, on making sure that this space is actually good. Even with the Indaba, this someone saying, like, I'm saying something that's not public, but we've been thinking about, okay, we've on one part, we already had building the community, bringing the community together. That's done. We started, as you saw, like, expanding the research focus and getting people to actually discuss their research, and as well have these discussions around what's actually going on with doing our work within the societies that we live. And the one other part is then, in this case, to think about how then do we get to be a place where people can publish, and publish in a way that really is like, a world-class work that they're sharing with their community on this path. And the reason why, and like, again, this is the part of the discussion on this part, and I have to add to this, was I remember one mentee asking, like, not really asking, but highlighting to me once that they'd applied to Black in AI, right? And their supervisor asked them, why would they apply to a Black conference? Like, why would they go to a conference and saying that they're Black?
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, well, like, you don't know anything about the work. You don't know anything about, like, but that becomes a thing. And I was always like concerned that there's people now who are
but I think that if you did, like, I get what you're saying, but I think if you did, for example, the deep learning in Daba, it's it's a conference or it's a journal, and anyone can submit to it, right? But it's just that if you're saying something about Africa or whatever, that's the journal that gives you credibility, right? Rather than, you have all of these Americans working on, like, I see, like, there was these, oh my God, okay, maybe I won't say it. So, I mean, people getting like millions of dollars to work on poverty, like, blah, 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 using data in Africa. And, like, they're all here, like 9, 10 white guys in American institutions, never had an African student, never had an African collaborator, and they're getting the money there, and then they're publishing in Nature or whatever. Like that, for me, that just shouldn't be happening, right? Like, so if I'm gonna work on anything African or whatever, exactly, I want to, the gatekeeper to be the Masakhane journal or the, Indaba journal or whatever. And it doesn't, and then eventually I feel like it just becomes the journal that you publish to. But anyways, I mean, I don't know. I'm all for it. I'm happy to help at some point make this happen.
Yeah, I was saying that I understand. No, it wasn't on that. It was just this thing of, it's not, why don't we just get into kind of NeurIPS only? And you're like, no, that's not the point on this part. And in the same way, if it was like, in Indaba Journal, it's a place where people can share, and they know they're sharing with, like, the people who will be able to benefit the most out of having this scholarship actually kind of going on. So that was the point on here, like, and these are the things in terms of, we're thinking about the structural things we're dealing with. It's not a simple, oh, now there's a place, there's a venue, but now what actually is going on. Okay, like, what is actually going on to the young researchers, the young engineers, and the experiences they're going through. And we need to change that it's not, you should be open to engage with the community, with the work, and show us your great work at any time.
Yeah, it's again goes to incentive structures. Like, if we made those venues the prestigious venues, that's what we look for when we hire people, that's what we look for when we're, whatever, promotions, that's what we look for, then that's how those venues become, that's what we cite, that's what we respect, then that's how those venues become the venues, right? Fact, that's how we made it, right? Like, that was a conference we created in 2018. And I mean, I just kept on publishing there. I'm like, this is kind of, my venue that I publish now, and so that's sort of how it became that way, right? And a lot of people, there's a lot of issues, or a lot of people who don't, I don't know, respect it or whatever, but I think it's up to us to make that the venue, right? And then the NeurIPS people can come there. They can publish there, I don't know. But I think it's something to think about, especially for Masakhane.
And I think it's a natural evolution of the African NLP workshop that we've been running anyway.
Oh, yeah. Anyways, yeah. And now the next evolution is,
Make it its own thing. Yeah. So I know Mohammed's been waiting patiently.
Oh no, he doesn't have his hands up anymore. He's like, I'm done.
I'm going to ask him to unmute again.
Hey guys. Hey. So I think I want to kind of go back to a question that's been touched on several times, which is around incentives. And what we often see are structural impediments that kind of beholden us to technology that we didn't create, that we don't own. In Masakhane, we build our models and so forth on code and models that have had millions of dollars spent on them and released by others. This is a practical barrier to that question that we're raising of how do we control the narrative and how do we control what gets the value of these things to us. And I'm interested in what the panel thinks about how we do that, who pays for this, because that's a fundamental barrier to.
So if we had money and that money came from sources that literally just care about the mission of Masakhane, is that what you're saying? And then we can. You're muted.
Not just Masakhane, but in general. Learning, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And I live in Kenya. I'm working in Kenya at the moment.
Yeah.
Half the time my network goes down. That's just because the state doesn't care about the quality of the infrastructure.
Look, you're not in Ethiopia, so I mean, I don't. To hear Kenyans complaining about the internet is kind of like,
exactly.
Let me tell you, yeah.
I know, but the point is, we don't live in a continent where the state cares about investing in these things.
I know.
Nor does it care about building the businesses that then invest in these things. So we are.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to know what the state cares about. I mean, like the refugees, the Libyan refugees wrote a letter to the African Union being like, where are you? You know, it was a heartbreaking letter, actually. I mean, this is an aside, but it was really a heartbreaking letter because it was they were saying, you know, you have failed to solve African problems. And so that's why we're going to these dangerous journeys, and then we're living in, you know, Europe, and we're, you know, like when I left Ethiopia, I did not do it by choice, right? We weren't like, oh yeah, let's go live somewhere else that's, you know, has more resources. So I just wish, I guess what you're saying is it's like about our institutions, I guess, and institution building, because if we did have states and institutions that are investing appropriately in the certain things, I think things would be different. But I guess then we have to work outside of those institutions to try to figure out what we can do in the meantime. Is sort of how, you know, we set the norms before the laws come, right? So one of the things I was thinking is maybe like close connections and collaborations between people on the continent and people off the continent that can share various resources that could help with that, right? Like if your network goes down half the time, you're also collaborating with someone whose, you know, network is not going down half the time, you know what I mean? But working towards the same goal. The second one is that's why I think the research questions that come from the content can be very interesting, because you're thinking about, you know, how, if we start thinking about how we can develop you know, models that require less resources, less data, or it might not be deep learning, it might be something else, right? Because we know that that's the kind of stuff that that would work there, right? It's not this large, you know, data centers kind of, you know, that stuff that's based on like huge compute and stuff like that. So in some sense, I think that, you know, the research questions can be very interesting that come from that resource constrained environment, because if we're thinking about how to operate in that under those resource constraints, rather than you know, I think we're still sort of kind of following along with kind of the big, huge labs and the kinds of paradigms that they're pushing.
I agree with you. I largely agree with you. It feels as though it's difficult to identify the space to be able to create these things and to be able to put those resources in.
Yeah.
There's space to be able to collaborate with these giants and be able to sort of change the mission statement as well.
Yeah, actually, speaking about this cross-continental collaboration, I'm trying to find this talk by Hassan. He's the Black and AI DJ, but he's also was the community manager. He's, but we know him more as the DJ. But he gave this 20-minute talk about the virtual, like distributed collaborations that he had with people and some of the challenges they faced and how they overcame them and stuff. I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna find it here and then I'll paste.
Awesome. So I think with given time, we need to wrap up. But hopefully Timnit will join us for another session sometime.
Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, I found the YouTube video. So let me, oops, sorry. This is not what I think it's this one. Let me just paste it here. Yeah, but I certainly will join you, of course.
Yay! We'll make it a bit later. So we actually have a meeting every Thursday. I'm just gonna like add you to the calendar event.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much, Timnit, and thank you everyone from the Masakhane community for joining today and contributing to the discussion. Round of applause in the form of claps or things in the chat. And there we go. People are finding the button. And I'm going to hand over to Vikosi to close off.
Okay. Thank you very much. And in this case, for everybody, it's been a great, I think this is a great session. This is our longest one ever. We've never had a session go for 2 hours, but it seems it can go on forever. It's almost like what is it? Twitter Spaces have become very popular in South Africa. Like, you know, so typically what happens now is that if somebody puts up a statement on Twitter and it's very controversial, people will respond and say Bula space. So Bula in Setswana means open a space. Yeah. And people can go on and like sit on that space for 6 hours. I've been so surprised. Like, yeah, so Africans like speaking about very controversial topics and they'll have conversations on that. So I think this could go the same way. So I was very worried that like, you know, we could spend more time. But yeah, this is, as I said, this was our 4th one. We've got 2 more to go. The next one actually is touching on data governance. From the lens of South Africa, we're hoping to actually have policymakers to come sit and talk about how they're coming up with data policy in South Africa and what data scientists should know. And the last one will be on looking at kind of social media and Asian, like, you know, and Asian users and some of the challenges that come with that. So I think everything seems to be really on, even though it wasn't planned that way. But there's all these things that are popping up and they're coming at the right time. So thank you again to Timnit. Have a good morning and a good day. Like, I don't know, 2nd or 3rd cup of coffee.
Good evening to people. I don't know.
Thanks, Jade, also for co-hosting, and Masakhane for coming in. All the new people, I put in the links to the newsletter. You can sign up for that and you'll get the invitations and also our research group. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.